Hello, Dan. You've had a busy week already. Started out earlier this week with a sit down with Mayor Ken Sim. What did you learn from him?
Well, we spoke about a number of different things, but one of the things we talked about was the uh, I raised with him the news that just last week the provincial government had tabled what they called a miscellaneous statutes amendment act or something like that. Anyway, it was basically a suite of amendments to different pieces of legislation. And that included the Vancouver Charter, which is this kind of unique piece of legislation that applies specifically to Vancouver. And so it included a bunch, I think more than 2 dozen, small tweaks and changes to the Vancouver Charter, clarifying different things and yada yada. But when I looked at it last week, I noticed that there was nothing in there about the Vancouver Park Board. So that's kind of this one major change to the Vancouver Charter that Vancouver's council has formally requested from the province. And now it's been about a year and a half since they made that request. It was back in December 2023 that Mayor Sim and his ABC majority on council made this formal ask to the province, asking them to change the charter to remove the requirement for Vancouver to have an elected park board, which is the only city, in BC that has this requirement. It's kind of a unique elected body. There's not many other sort of big cities in Canada or even North America that have these kind of elected park boards overseeing parks and recreation. Sim has made the argument that it's an archaic, inefficient system, and the city would be better served if the park board was abolished and parks and recreation were brought under the control of sort of the city and
Right,
city council, the way they are in,
right.
almost most other cities. Anyway, but there was nothing in last week's amendments that touched on the park board. So I spoke with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and just clarified, hey, do any of these, nothing mentions the park board, but do any of these amendments somehow, you know, influence the park board or apply to the park board or the requirement to have the park board? Does any of this address the request that Vancouver's council made in 2023? And the ministry confirmed that no, this doesn't relate to the park board at all. So when I was speaking with Mayor Sim, I asked him about that. I said, we saw these amendments. There's nothing in there about the park board. Do you have a sense, is something coming soon, like in this spring sitting, or is it, because we had thought maybe it was coming soon. Anyway, he explained that he was quite frustrated that it does not appear to be coming soon. It's not in this latest round of amendments. He doesn't have an indication that it's happening in this spring sitting, which they had previously been hoping it would happen. It's kind of been a series of things. When he announced this decision back in December 2023, he thought it was going to be done within a few months, like in spring of 2024. And then in spring of 2024, the premier said it wasn't going to be happening before that year's provincial election, but it would happen soon after. And then, the election came and went. That fall sitting came and went. Now we're into a new year, obviously, and it's not going to happen in this this spring sitting. So the mayor had mentioned that he had been told maybe it'll happen in the fall sitting, but he's obviously expressing a lot of frustration around that. And he was
Right.
quite critical of the province. He says they're dragging their feet and it's costing Vancouver taxpayers more money the longer this draws out. But then, we're hearing a lot of people who conversely have said they agree with uh, the province not rushing, taking their time. Some people are making the point that, they say Ken Sim did not run in 2022 on getting rid of the park board. He doesn't have sort of a democratic mandate to do this. That's the point some people are making. And they say, some people are saying if he does want to do this, and obviously he does, it seems to be a big thing for him. He could potentially run on this next year. The next municipal election is only a year and a half away. There's going to be a general elections in 2026. Sim has previously said that he plans to run for a second term. So some people are saying he can run on this and tell voters, if you want to get rid of the park board, here's the case for it. It's going to make our parks run better. It's going to save you a lot of money as taxpayers. There'll be less pressure on property taxes. You're going to have better parks and more efficiently run for cheaper. He can make that case and make it to the voters, and they can vote on it next year as a campaign issue, because it wasn't a campaign issue in 2022.
Right. And that would be interesting because then would ABC run as they did last time, candidates for park board, or would they, um, you know, Because again, it's probably not going to happen overnight. It would still take some time, even if you approved it. Yeah.
I mean, I remember, so Sim did raise the idea of abolishing the park board before the last election, but like a long time before the election, back before ABC existed. This was when he was, uh, he had finished second in the 2018 election. And then a year or so later, he kind of came out and publicly said that he did want to run again, but he wasn't going to run with the NPA, his previous party. And he, at that time, one of the first kind of, this was, I think, like 3 years before the election, or at least two, he said, I want to run for, I want to run for mayor again. I'm not going to run with the NPA. I might run as independent, might start a new party, but I'm going to propose that we should get rid of the park board. We don't need elected park board. So it was a big kind of campaign idea way before there even was a campaign. But later on, after ABC formed, they put together a slate, they put together their 94-point platform and stuff, and Sim changed his tune about the park board. He ended up running a slate of 6 park board commissioners, and he said, instead of getting rid of the park board, we're going to try to fix it. We're going to run really good people. We're going to have majorities on park board and council so we can work together. And that was the message he gave to the voters before the last election. But early on, I think I remember when I spoke with him a couple of years before the last election, when he talked about this idea of getting rid of the park board, and I asked him, like, would you potentially run with park board commissioners? And I remember there was the idea raised that he could run with commissioners who were going to run under the impression, with the understanding that they were running to be basically the last elected park board. They were running, whether it took a year or 2 years or 3 years or the whole term, they were running to be the final elected park board, oversee its transition, oversee its dissolution. And there was that idea kind of raised that you could run with commissioners who were running with the idea that we'll oversee it while it winds down. Right. But of course, that was not what they ended up doing, at least according to half of the commissioners elected with ABC, who said they ran being told they were going to serve a 4-year term, make the park board run better and improve it. So half of those 6 commissioners, 3 of them have departed the party basically the day that Sim's decision became public that he wanted to get rid of the board back in 2023. So those 3 have left the board and are now sitting as independents, and they're quite critical of the way the mayor and ABC are trying to do this.
Okay. The other person you sat down with, or at least had an interview with this week, is the president of Holborn, and they came today, and you came out with a story today about a rather ambitious project that they're proposing for downtown Vancouver. What does that look like?
Yeah, so I got to sit down with Ju Kim Tia, who's the president of Holborn. It's the first time I've spoken with him at all, and I've written a number of stories over the years that have mentioned Holborn and different developments around town. He has not. I don't think he's done a lot of interviews in the last few years. He was doing more media like a decade ago or so, kind of when I do recall actually back in, it would have been 2013. I did attend a press conference that Holborn did with the Trump family, Donald Trump, long before he had any, or at least anybody knew he had political ambitions. Donald Trump was there, I think, with both of his sons and his daughter, and Ju Kim was there, the president of Holborn, because Holborn was partnering with the Trump family, and they were building the Trump Tower in downtown Vancouver. Anyway, but in more recent years, they have not done as much media, or I haven't seen, them do a lot of interviews. Sometimes we would get media statements and stuff. But so anyway, it was interesting to sit down with the guy and meet him. And Gregory Henriquez was there as well, very prominent Vancouver architect, the managing principal of Henriquez Partners Architects, who have designed, some of the most recognizable buildings in Vancouver, like the Woodwards Tower, the Telus Gardens, a lot of things that people really recognize. So anyway, Henriquez is partnering with Tia and Holborn on this proposal, and it's a huge proposal. So we met at Henriquez Partners offices, which is in the Telus Gardens building, directly across West Georgia Street from the site where they're proposing to build these 3 huge towers. And it basically, the project takes up almost 2 entire city blocks right in the middle of downtown. So the scale of that kind of development to happen right in the middle of downtown is pretty unique. I mean, the only thing I can think of that will kind of compare in terms of that size of one downtown parcel will be when they redevelop the former St. Paul's site on Burrard. That will be huge. It's a huge downtown single site, which Concord Pacific will be developing eventually one day, presumably. They own it now. Anyway, so Henriquez, so Holborn has been acquiring properties on this parcel for 2 decades almost. They bought the Bay Parkade and then also 500 Dunsmuir, which was a century-old former hotel that had become a rooming house and was social housing for years. They bought those back in 2006. So the Bay Parkade is kind of mid-block. It's a multi-story like parkade that was connected to the Bay building via like a skywalk across Seymour Street. Anyway, and then over the ensuing years, Holborn kept collecting pieces of that parcel, culminating just last year with the Randall building, which is another nearly century old building, commercial building on Georgia Street there. And so now, yeah, their plan is to redevelop almost the entire block. There's one building on the corner of Dunsmuir and Seymour that Holborn does not own, and so that will remain. And yeah, so the project is the tallest tower would be more than 1,000 feet, which would make it, that's taller than anything else in the city.
By how much do you figure? Maybe
I can't remember offhand.
Yeah.
Because Vancouver's current tallest building is the Shangri-La, right? I believe.
Okay.
And,
it's also up the hill, so it's maybe that gives it some additional height.
Yeah, I mean, when you see their renderings, there are illustrations. I encourage people to go on our website, go on vancouversun.com or theprovince.com and look at the illustrations. They have renderings of the building itself and or the buildings themselves and the plaza. There's a really cool public plaza that would be there on West Georgia Street. But there's another rendering that kind of has a aerial photo of the downtown peninsula showing these towers kind of lit up, and they really would tower around a lot of the rest of downtown. They're very tall buildings.
Yeah, you mentioned the street level. I mean, again, I don't know how closely the architectural drawings eventually resemble what was built at some of these places, but there does seem to be a lot of open space at street level. If you're thinking of that as two city blocks, there's quite a large public sort of plaza, as you say, down at street level.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual design. It's a long way from what we typically see built in Vancouver and Metro Vancouver in general, which are those sort of standard glass towers. So a project like this, of this scale, is the city, I mean, what has the city said? What has council signaled over recent years as far as their acceptance to sort of breaking the mold, the traditional glass tower that you see around Falls Creek? What are they looking for?
Well, I mean, when I was speaking with Mr. Tia yesterday, or earlier this week, the president of the company, he was talking about, it's been, I think, over 7 or 8 years, they've brought a series of proposals, like different concepts for the site to City Hall. None of them ever got to the formal application stage, but there's all these pre-application kind of inquiry conversations that happen with the city planning staff. Now, there would have been different councils over the years and different heads of the planning department. The head of the planning department has changed a few times. Obviously, council has changed, but this new current council has already, signaled a real desire to change some of the old rules to enable more housing and other priorities. One of which is hotel space. Sort of one of the key priorities of this council is boosting the city's supply of hotel rooms. And this would add, I think, more than 900. It's a 900 room hotel, and conference space, convention space, and restaurants, and a huge public observation deck up at the top of the 1,000-foot building, which looks like something that it looks very science fiction. It looks really interesting. It's like a 360-degree, and it would be publicly accessible. Anyway. So this council has kind of signaled, and they already demonstrated that they're willing to sort of change old rules. So, for example, rules around view protections. And this is kind of one of the really key pieces of this, is that previously there had been different ideas, and they'd talked to City Hall. The developer had talked to City Hall. Different architects had drawn up some different designs, but they were not supported by city staff. A big reason, according to the developer, was these view protections. Vancouver had these rules that have been on the books for decades about sort of protecting certain publicly accessible views. So you can see the mountains, you can see different things from certain places around town, which limited the allowable building height in a lot of locations, including this one. So last summer, this current ABC Majority Council voted to change the view protections. There still are some view protections, but a lot of them have been either eliminated or changed, which has allowed a lot more development, including on this site. And yeah, so that, and there's a new head of planning who has kind of said that he sees his job as trying to make things happen and get stuff built quicker, bigger, faster. And obviously there's still considerations about livability and about and there still are rules about view protections, and there still are rules about what can be built where. But at least to hear Mr. Tia describe it, the president of Holborn, he says that it seems to him like the city planning staff have kind of warmed to this type of major ambitious project. They're more warm to it now than they were 7 or 8 years ago, or their predecessors were 7 or 8 years ago. So now there has actually been a formal rezoning application submitted. I don't believe it's public yet, or at least it wasn't when I checked earlier this week, but it could be within the next week or two. It could be on the city website. I mean, my understanding is it's hundreds of pages. It's a full on, and this is the first time that a formal application has been submitted for this site. It is also noteworthy that the project itself changed dramatically because Henriquez said that they had been working on it for about a year and a half, and then they had initially planned to incorporate the heritage building at 500 Dunsmuir, or at least the facade of it, incorporate it somehow into the design. But then last December, Vancouver's chief building official basically said that that building was so dilapidated, it was at risk of imminent collapse, and it was a public safety risk. So the city ordered it demolished, which a lot of people were upset about. Anyway, Holborn and Henriquez said that they did not expect that to happen. After it happened, it caused them to have to go, refigure their design over the last 6 months, basically. And they've come back with this new design that no longer incorporates that building, because obviously that building is not there anymore.
Who ultimately decides on the aesthetics of the building? Like, they've proposed something that is visually very striking, and some people will love it and some people will hate it, and there'll be lots of people in between. Mm-hmm. But who decides that on behalf of the city? Because most of us are never going to live in it, but we all have to look at it. So who makes those decisions for the city?
Well, I mean, I guess they will work, the proponents, the developer and the architects will work with city staff, planning staff, over the next months, year, and they'll work together on it. And then eventually, the proponents hope that it will get before city council for a final decision that will include, a whole bunch of renderings and designs and specifications that they would then be expected to, if it does get approved, it's something that city staff and the proponent would work on together. And then, so typically when city staff presents something to council, they're recommending it. They're saying, we've been working on this and here's why we recommend it. It comes with, we think the design is good for this reason. And there's also the urban design panel, which is a group of architects. And so they will make recommendations and stuff about the form. So it does go through a kind of a process. And it's just in terms of benefits, not so much related to architecture, but in terms of public benefits, it is also important to note. So these 3 massive towers right on West Georgia, the middle of downtown, are kind of the big thing. But there's a 4th tower on a separate site a few blocks away. So Holborn owns a property at Abbott and Hastings in the downtown east side, and Holborn is proposing to build a tower there of 30 some odd stories. So similar to the height of the Woodwards Tower across the street, which Henriquez also designed like 15 years, 20 years ago. So they're proposing to build a tower there that would be all non-market housing, social housing. I'm not sure the exact details, but they would build non-market housing there. And then once it's completed, it would be completely turned over to the city. So that's kind of part of this proposal. They're saying, let us build this massive condo, hotel, apartment, commercial development over here on West Georgia. And at the same time, they would build in the downtown east side social housing that would be turnkey, handed over, and the city owns it afterwards. And I spoke with them about how the timing would work, and they said,
Right.
because Holborn is also known as the developer
Yes.
that built Little Mountain, where hundreds of units of social housing were demolished, and it took them. They were meant to be replaced. They are being replaced, but it's happening at a much slower speed than people had initially imagined, and the land sat largely empty for a decade. So, considering all of that, I asked them, what will be are you going to build these towers and this hotel and stuff, and maybe the social housing gets built a decade or two from now? They said they expect it would be a condition that the social housing has to have its occupancy permits before they can, get occupancy permits for the other market.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that would incentivize them to build it all at the same time, and yeah.
That's the idea. Now, presumably, a lot of it will depend on the market, right?
Right.
If condo pre-sales, things like that will, because they can't build it with money if they don't have coming in. So it'll depend on a lot of things that are somewhat outside of anyone's control. But that's the idea. They said that they believe they can make it work with the social housing getting completed before the entire other thing gets completed.
All right. Good. Well, we'll watch this one. It's going to take a long time, but we'll watch it find its way through City Hall. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Harold.